Hi everyone, I'm Evening Ransom and you have found your way to Evening TV. It seemed to me that there has been such an explosion of people talking about this, and really what we wanted to have happen was that narcissism and emotional abuse and all that would get to be more common knowledge, would get to be something that people were talking about and recognizing. And so that was our goal, right? That's what we all wanted to have happen, so that it would be less of a mystery. When we first started recognizing that we were in trouble, it took quite a lot of sleuthing out to figure out, to find our way here, to find our way to some answers and to find our way to some definitions. And so what those of us that have actually put ourselves out there to talk about it, part of the reason why is because we were hoping to make it more common knowledge, so that it wasn't such a mystery to the next person who has to go and try and figure it out, because it's such a lonely thing, because most of us in our lives have gone through some really terrible trauma, and we're feeling confused and ashamed and heartbroken and angry and so many things, and really don't know where to turn for answers. And so we want to get it in the mainstream so that people can start recognizing what's going on, and also, kind of a grassroots approach to training therapy, to getting therapists interested in it, because the field of psychology is really behind the times in terms of the way that it's training psychologists. And I know this because I have an education in psychology, so I know that the discussion about personality disorders was not really part of the regular curriculum. The field of psychology is based on a time when most psychiatric problems were neurotic problems. And this is a discussion that I've had on some other videos about what the difference is between a personality disorder and a neurosis. The fact that most psychology is built around neurotic problems. A lot of us who are empaths, or the people that end up being targeted by personality disorder people, actually are neurotic people. And what it is it's a spectrum of responsibility. And those who are neurotic are taking on too much responsibility, a pathological amount of responsibility, that things that aren't their fault, things that aren't their responsibility, they take on, like they think that they should be able to fix everything. And people with personality disorders take on far too little responsibility, and the things that really are theirs, their side of the street to keep clean, they're not. And so it ends up being a very symbiotic, dangerous but symbiotic relationship, because the personality disordered person is more than happy to give over to the neurotic person all the responsibility for everything that's wrong. And so the neurotic person will be the one jumping through hoops. And the reason that psychology ends up geared towards the neurotic person is because that is the person that will find their way to the therapist's office. Because neurotic people are miserable, they're in pain, because it hurts to be neurotic. It hurts to be, you think everything is your fault, you're trying to fix yourself, what's wrong with me, and the personality disorder person is not feeling pain. If they're in pain, they're not aware of it. And so, because they're acting out, the people around them are in pain, that's for sure, but they're not so much in pain, so they're not really the ones that find their way to therapist's office. And so they're avoiding therapists a lot of the time because they feel superior, and they feel like, why would I need to go to a therapist's office? There's nothing wrong with me. Or if they're a little bit more aware, they might have a fear that they don't want their false reality messed with. And so they're not the ones that are wanting to go explore their inner self and change and grow. They're not looking for that. They're looking for, everybody leave me in my false reality alone. We're doing just fine, thank you very much. Everyone around us is miserable, but we're doing just fine. Because so many of us came to this discussion via all these different avenues. And some of us, I don't think it's luck, I think it's serendipitous, but a lot of people like myself have, it might have been because I was geared a certain way, I had a certain personality type, so I was drawn to psychology courses and things like that, and so my bachelor's degree that I got a long time ago. My education was well before I knew what was going to happen in my own personal life, way, way, way before. But I still have the education and credentials that were going to set me up for what eventually I would go into because of what was happening in my life personally. So, and I that seems to be a kind of a common theme. I noticed that there's quite a few of us on here that we're already nurses, psychiatric nurses, or life coaches, or things like that. Professionally in the healing professions and doing something with mental illness and psychiatric healing. So that predated when it was a personal crisis that actually thrust us into learning about narcissistic abuse and eventually coming to do this. And then there are a lot of people that have channels and things like that really are just coming purely from personal experience, which is great, which is fine. We don't want, like, narcissism, for instance, to just become a term that basically means anyone who pisses me off, anyone who does things that I don't like, anyone who rejects me is a narcissist. It's become like a taboo word to call somebody the word of the day. We don't want that. That takes away from the integrity of what's really going on. This is a real problem. It's a real psychiatric disorder, and so I think that it's a good idea to just I'm going to do a little series on getting back to basics, on basically just redefining for all of us what these things are with the clinical definitions, so that we can all carry with us some real knowledge, not just based on the emotional experience of what happened to us, which is very, very important and is what drives the passion of why we're even here. Got that? Really, really important. And so in effect how it works. You have the illustrative, concept of how it all plays out in a life, which is critically important. And that gives you street cred, that's for sure. And in a lot of fields that really matters. And in this one it really does, because really, without the street cred when it comes to this, you don't get it. No one who has not experienced narcissistic abuse gets it. And so it's really important to have that. That said, I think that it's really good for all of us for us to hold on to clinical definitions so that we can all sound really smart. We don't want the bad guys to be able to discredit us. We don't want to look like we are on a witch hunt, right? We want to look like we really know what we're talking about, and that we're following criteria that is laid out by the DSM. The truth is that really the only ones that are qualified, that actually can make a true clinical diagnosis, are licensed psychologists or psychiatrists. And I think very few people, when they're talking about their narcissist, are actually talking about someone who has a clinical diagnosis from a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist. My ex-husband actually does have a formal diagnosis. It was one of the few things that ended up shooting him in the foot, was that he was taking me to therapy, trying to get something written up about me that was going to say that I was crazy. And so he had lined up this therapist and primed him, and then was taking me there. And I was thinking that we were going there to save our marriage, but what he was really doing was trying to get ammo against me that he could use in court. And what ended up happening was that we went every week for 6 months, and the therapist was running us through rigorous tests, really kind of unbeknownst to me, and then after 6 months gave us this really extensive clinical diagnosis for both of us. And I was diagnosed actually with CPTSD, and he was diagnosed with cluster B personality disorders, narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. which was actually, it was very, very damning, the whole thing, but I didn't even realize how damning it was. I did nothing with it. I did nothing with it that could have helped me in the divorce. I stepped it away, and only after, and this was at the very beginning of my divorce, and only after it had all played out in Technicolor and everything that was predicted in that report and more happened. I mean, it was the accuracy of that report was just really uncanny. But I didn't do anything with it until years after it had all played out. We want these terms to mean something. It's really important that they mean something, because otherwise all this effort that we're going through is for naught. Trying to bring awareness, a public awareness of an epidemic which some have called the phenomenon of our time. And I believe that it really is. I believe that it is changing culture, it's changing society, and I know all too well how devastating it is, because the ultimate effect of it, the ultimate negative downside effect of it, I've experienced, and that is the total breakdown of my family, the loss of an entire community, and ultimately children that have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, a son who was self-medicating and died. So that is how dark it can be. And not only that, those of you who are watching my channel also know that even before that happened, I, at 33 years old, had a heart attack, had a coronary artery dissection, and a near-death experience. So my heart actually literally broke before I even knew what was going on, before I knew anything about all this. And that event, actually surviving the near-death experience, was the beginning of the end of my previous life. That surviving was when my life basically unraveled. And so that's basically where this story, my story with learning about complex post-traumatic stress disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and all this stuff really sort of begins. You don't want someone to say to you, if you're calling someone a narcissist, you want to be able to explain what that means. And so if someone says to you, well, what are the 9 traits of a narcissist? If someone gives you that little test, you want to know. I heard it said by someone who has a really popular channel talking about this, and he said that he was pretty sure that the vast majority of the people that are talking about narcissism wouldn't even be able to list 2 of the things that are considered the clinical traits that must be present for you to say that someone has a narcissistic personality disorder. Now let's back up a little bit. Let's also remember that narcissism is something we all have, and it's healthy to have it, and we are born with narcissism. And part of the growing up process, part of the growing up and maturing into adulthood process, is the coming to terms with the fact that is a growing empathy and a growing concern for others, and ability to consider other people's needs and all of that. And especially as it prepares you for relationships and prepares you for parenting and things like that, it's the ability even to put someone else's needs before your own, which is what parents need to do for their children. And a lot of us on here have had the experience of narcissistic parents who are basically parents who didn't learn to do that. And so we grew up with a upside down relationship with our parents where their needs always came first, and we were parentified in that way. And that's also a term that gets really confusing. The role of parenting is, by definition, is the willingness and the ability to put your child's needs ahead of your own and take care of them first. So you have to be able to totally consider their needs. A narcissist cannot do that. Either cannot or chooses not to, but one way or the other, a narcissist, that by definition a narcissist will not do that. A narcissist always puts their own needs first. And if your needs get met as a child of a narcissist or a spouse of a narcissist or anything like that, if your needs get met at all, it's purely by luck. It's purely because it was also meeting their needs to do it. So, and so this can be kind of confusing a lot of times. I grew up, for instance, with all my material needs being met, and no one was going to look at me and say, "Oh, poor little, abused child." Definitely not. And so, I had many things, and so it never occurred to me to think that my needs weren't being met. But at closer examination, what I realized was that the needs that were getting met were the ones that my parents wanted to meet. I had nice clothing, and I was in ballet classes, and I was allowed to do a lot of activities, and my parents were always present at performances and recitals and awards nights and things like that. Okay? And so that can on the surface look like a really great thing, like I had really caring parents. But there wasn't any times that they would think me privately. We didn't have, there was no time that I remember like playing a game with them or getting a story read by them or having them tell me they love me or things like that other people couldn't see. Things that weren't observed by others. To be able to say that someone has a narcissistic personality disorder, which is to say that they have gone past the range of healthy narcissism into a place where it is a disorder, okay? And if you have, you can go either way. You can have unhealthy narcissism in either direction. And most of us who ended up being the targeted ones have unhealthy narcissism in the other direction, and that's where neuroses ends up. But if you go down this way and you have unhealthy narcissism to the extent that it has become a personality disorder, so you have healthy narcissism here, and then you get NPD here, and past here is antisocial personality disorder. So you pass narcissistic personality disorder on your way to antisocial personality disorder. All sociopaths are narcissists, have unhealthy narcissism. They have malignant narcissism. Not all people with NPD have the qualities of a sociopath. A person with overt narcissism or NPD, and that's a person who is just overtly grandiose, kind of obnoxious. A sociopath, on the other hand, is much more sneaky than that. You could think that they are just the sweetest, kindest, gentlest, even empathic person, you could think. They can come off looking a whole lot of different ways, but generally speaking, they don't come off looking like the overt narcissist. They tend to be much better liked. They're much more popular. Overt narcissists more and more are able to win popularity contests even as overt narcissists, as we just learned with Donald Trump. But that says something about our culture and what's acceptable in our culture, and we are an increasingly narcissistic culture. A lot of overt narcissists are CEOs, they tend to do fine, especially if they're men. Okay, so here are the traits. Now you have to have 5 or more of these for the diagnosis to be able to qualify as having a narcissistic personality disorder. Okay, so reacting to criticism with anger, shame, or humiliation. And this can be just perceived criticism. It doesn't even have to be any real criticism. Taking advantage of others to reach their own goals. Exaggerating their own importance, achievements, and talents. Imagining unrealistic fantasies of success, beauty, power, intelligence, or romance. Requiring constant attention and positive reinforcement from others. Becoming jealous easily. Lacking empathy and disregarding the feelings of others. Being obsessed with themselves. Pursuing mainly selfish goals. Trouble keeping healthy relationships. Becoming easily hurt and rejected. Setting goals that are unrealistic. Wanting the best of everything. And appearing unemotional. So of those traits, a person would have to have 5 or more to meet the clinical definition for a narcissistic personality disorder. So, keep those handy so that you really know what you're talking about if someone were to ask you.